WPGet Web Dev Tutorials for all user levels. Okay guys, a quick dive into using Sass or SCSS for creating your classes in either Elementor or Bricks, whatever you're using. So I've done a bit of a tutorial on using BEM class naming in both Bricks and in Elementor. At the moment I'm actually looking at the Elementor version. I'm going to show you what I mean by using SCSS. So I'm using WPCodeBox here, which has a front end basically or UI where you can create your SCSS and it renders it directly in the browser. You can render Sass using Node, or there's other utilities and IDEs that'll do it for you. This is unbelievably good because it is treating it as if it is just CSS. So if I want to write out my CSS classes as CSS and save that works. It works equally as well if I rewrite those as SCSS and save. It automatically generates all of this CSS that I need. So here's an example I'm going to work through. So the demonstration that I did with BEM is a services container, and they've got a services block or a service block, and that service block behaves differently at our tablet breakpoint of 1024 and differently at our mobile breakpoint of 767. Again, this is the Elementor breakpoints. The Bricks ones are a bit different. And then we've got our service block with our featured modifier. And then we've got a service block with featured modifier on hover. We've got a service block with an element heading. In Elementor, we've got to specify the H2 because there's a wrapper. And we've got a service block with a element of image. And again, because it's a wrapper, we've got to specify the image element in there. So that's our CSS that we need to make make this ugly looking thing here. I've been playing around too much with it, I think, to make this work as a service block list. Okay, so how we do this in SCSS and what is the benefit? So first of all, SCSS is a syntax for Sass. So Sass, which is syntactically awesome style sheets, was created some time ago as a way to make CSS more flexible. CSS does not have mix-ins, functions, variables that you can populate into it. It misses a lot of features. CSS3 has certainly come a long way, but it certainly doesn't have the capabilities that Sass has. At some point, the developers of Sass decided that the syntax wasn't quite what they wanted, so instead of confusing the syntax, they created a new syntax called SCSS, which is pretty much what everybody would use these days for Sass. So it gets confusing because we're actually talking about Sass, but the syntax we use is SCSS. All right, so that said, let's have a look at how we would recreate this entire CSS here using Sass. So I'm going to head over to that. And our first level is exactly the same as CSS because it's a single level. It's just the CSS syntax there. We then get to the service block, and the first part of that is exactly the same as it is over here in our CSS here. So that's all exactly the same. Now over in our CSS, see we've got these media queries. So in the media query, we've got to specify what it's for, and then we've got to put in the class and then the properties. Here's the first difference. When we go to SCSS, all we have to do is media, where do we want it to apply, and then the properties. Because it knows that that is inside the service block, it automatically adds this part to it when it renders. Okay, so a little bit less typing there, a little bit less typing there because all you have to do is type in media, what the breakpoints are, and any other properties, and then the actual properties there. So that's the first thing. So by These two here are setting our breakpoints for 40%, for tablet to be FlexBase is 40%, mobile FlexBase is 100%. In pure CSS, we'd have to create these meta queries, and the only difference is we've got to put in this class name in the curly braces. All right, so at the moment I've got this disabled, by the way, the CSS. So if I head back over to my SCSS, here's the next thing, the and, which means append. Okay, so we've got service block as our class name. Then we're going to append -- featured and set our border 2 pixels, etc. So head over to the CSS and have a look at that. So service block -- featured. There's our CSS there. In SCSS, it's and -- featured, and then our CSS rules here. Go back to the CSS. To add the hover, we've got to go service block featured service block -- featured :hover, and then add our rules there. SCSS, all we do is say after the and featured, append hover. So and, because I'll refer to and as append. So after featured, append hover, and that's going to put the CSS rules there. So that there is our featured and hover, which replaces the service block featured here and the service block featured hover there. So that syntax there is replaced by this here. Okay. Now it might look a little bit difficult, but it actually makes sense because it's hierarchical. What we're saying is start with that. Okay, then the next variation on that, we want to append that. And then on that, we want to append this. And that will, so it's hierarchical. And it just makes sense. Once you start using this and realize the power of it, it makes sense. All right, now the next part is our heading. So we've got a service block _ heading. So the BEM, that's the element. And then a H2 inside that. If we look at our BEM, we've got append from the service block level, append _ heading, and then append a space H2. So if we don't have the space there, if we just have a H2, it's going to append H2 to the end of this word heading, which then is invalid. So we want to put a space there. So if you want it to append directly, no space. If you want it to be followed by the H2, then you put a space in there. All right, so that's the heading. And then heading over to the image, we've got our service block _ image. So head back over to our BEM in SCSS, and we've got, I can do it this way. So we've got append _ image, and then I've got image there. All right. We could easily, if we got other things we want to do there, what we could do is put and space image and put that inside a block there. Okay, so we're doing the same thing as what we did up here. So we've got, make that make more sense. Okay, so we're doing the same thing as we did above here. So we can go _ image, and then we want to append a space image, and then that's our image properties there. Or we could have just done this as sticking the image on the end of that. I prefer to separate it out hierarchically, then we can do whatever we want. So let's say we want to just target the Elementor wrapper for that image. Anything we put in here, we might put in there, say, cut background red. Okay, so the actual element, that's the service block. Yep, so the service block _ image, the background will be red, which is actually on Elementor as a wrapper. And then the image after that will have this applied to it. I'm not going to do that because that's just crazy. But when you're looking at bricks, when you add a image or a heading or any other element to the editor, it adds the single DOM element, which is that heading, image, etc. With Elementor, it adds a element wrapper. So this is the widget, sorry, the div, which is the widget, and then there's a widget wrapper under that, and then there's the element that you actually want. So you have to think of it differently. Now, that's pretty much that. Now, if I save that and head back over, so just to be clear, my services CSS is disabled and my demo BEM is enabled, and I'll put a comment up here so we can find it. And if I head back over to here and do a refresh, everything's still styled. If we have a look at the page source, look for my services block. So this here is the CSS that was rendered from my SCSS. So here we go. So if I look at my service block and let's say dash features, so I go service block dash featured, border 2 pixel solid, color of primary. Head over to here, my service block featured 2 pixel solid primary. So this here now, what's actually rendered looks the same as what we had in our pure CSS. But we're rendering it through SCSS. Now, I like SCSS. I like the hierarchical approach to it. There's a lot more that I haven't covered here today, but just for the hierarchical side of how you write your code, it just makes sense. And particularly if you're using a methodology like BEM, where you want to see how that works hierarchically, you don't want to end up with, I've seen classes where you'll have like, service, and then there's a extension on that to header, slash dot sub. Okay, and then you'll have maybe a color red. And then when you want to override this with a hover on the header, you might have to create this rule as service header hover sub color blue. So let's say you're going to write that out as pure CSS, right? So you're saying on a service, followed by a header, followed by a sub, we want it to be red, and then when there's a service, when the header's hovered, we want the sub to be blue. SCS version, service, all right? That'd be the service as a top level, and then we'd do and space dot header, all right? And then inside that we want and dot sub color. Okay, so that's our representation of that. Instead of going space dot, we're putting an and dot, which does look like more at the moment, but where it gets really powerful is now if we do and dot colon, so there's no space, hover. What do we want to happen when the header's hovered? Okay, we might have more things we want to do here. So now we'd say, okay, on hover, we do and space dot sub color blue. All right, so this is our SCSS version of that. All right, so any part of here we want to change. Let's say, for example, we've got another property under there. We'll go service header hover sub 2 color green. All right, so we've got all the CSS here. To add this, all we'd have to do in our SCSS is we've already got a hover state, and we just go and space, oops, what did I do there? Space dot sub 2 color. Okay, so now because we've got our hierarchical system here, on the hover, get the sub, make it blue. get the sub2 and make it green. So you don't have to keep track of all this. And what happens if you change this? Let's say, for example, I go, okay, I'm going to change that name to header main. All right. Let's change that to header main. You've got to go through every one of these and you've got to edit that and change it to header main. SCSS. How do we change that? We change that to header main. All right. We don't have to change it anywhere else because these are all hierarchical. So these all inherit from the property above it. So there's a lot of advantages to writing in SCSS. It just makes more sense when you're going and looking at your code and you're going, well, what applies where? How do I add additional states on hover or selected or focused or whatever you want? It just makes sense to do it this way. And what happens though, unfortunately, browsers do not understand SCSS. They understand CSS only. So this needs to be compiled to CSS. And that's exactly what this system does. So in fact, I might just take that CSS out and let's see what that actually compiles. So I'm just going to save that. F5. Okay, so here we go. So my SCSS here, I'm going to zoom in. So my SCSS here, which is the service, header main, hover, sub and sub2 on hover has become, here we go. So we got service, header main, hover, sub, color blue, service, header main, hover, sub2, color green, service, header main, sub, color red. Okay, so this CSS here was generated from this SCSS. It may seem hard at first when you start looking at this, but it actually makes more sense. And this is how CSS really should have been done in the first place. So cascading style sheets kind of intimates a hierarchical system, but it's not hierarchical in the way that you actually write your syntax. SCSS is hierarchical, and it just makes a lot of sense when you're trying to organize your code into logical states. So that's pretty much why I encourage you, where you can, to use this. WPCodeBox, I'm not sure about the other code managers for WordPress, but WPCodeBox does this natively. As you type the code, press the save button, it automatically creates the CSS for you. So my preference would be get CodeBox and use that for SCSS rather than CSS. And thank me later. Thank you.